Hi there, and welcome along to this special Friday bonus pod edition of the Gersnet Weekly Podcast, the totally free and independent Rangers podcast that is made by for fans for the fans. As I say, just a wee bonus Friday pod this evening as we look ahead to the Ross County game tomorrow, 3 o'clock at Ibrox. But the pod is available for download every week and will stream live on a Sunday night with our main flagship show and then be available for download on a Monday morning wherever you get your podcasts as normal. If you're the first time joining us here this evening on Gersnet, then thank you very much and welcome along. Please do head over to the website at www.gersnet.co.uk, where you can also get involved in the friendly, lively discussion forum, as well as match previews, reviews, news, archives, all sorts. So please do head over to the website when you can. Joining us this evening, as you can see, we've got the cameras on, so it's myself, Ross Bennett, hosting, and we've just got the one guest tonight, but we're delighted to have him with us. It's the man who I once saw described on Twitter as surprisingly all right. It's Stewart Weir. Stewart, good evening. How are you?
I told my mum never to go back on Twitter after that comment.
I was going to say, it was a nice comment. It was actually by one of our fellow Gersnet hosts. How's your week been?
Yeah, it's been as active as everyone else's, I suppose. It's when a strange time we live in, but thankfully we have football to continue with and plenty of football to talk about as well.
No, exactly. Now, before we get cracking on with the show, before I forget, I will fulfil our contractual obligations and remind everyone who's listening to please do check out our sponsors of the show tonight, which is rangerspicks.com. It's the official Rangers Pick'em game. It's dead easy, and we're actually talking off there that we all sort of use this as well and get a lot of enjoyment from it. So if you head over to www.rangerspicks.com for the official Rangers Pick'em game, all you have to do is answer 10 very, very easy questions about the match tomorrow against Ross County. And if you get more questions right than anyone else, you will win a share of £1,000. We've noticed that over the last couple of weeks, someone's been winning £500 and it's absolutely free to enter. So please do head over to the website, rangerspicks.com, check that out. It is gambling, so 18 plus, and please do gamble responsibly. Now, Stuart, obviously we're back in action tomorrow. It feels like it's been a wee while now that we're not having midweek games anymore. But before we get into the game, there's a couple of pieces of news that I think we should discuss. First things first, this afternoon we get the news that Kieran Dixon from the youth side has signed a contract extension. It seemed to me to come a wee bit out of the blue, but what's your immediate reaction to that news?
I think if you look in general, there's quite a bit of activity on the youth side of things, not just within Ibrox itself, but all of a sudden, out of the blue, there are players being ushered out on loan deals, and there's also Rangers being linked with several other players, especially down south. So there is obviously a bit of planning going ahead for the future. The thing I will say about youth players and young players, coming through, talent spotting and putting all your chips in certain players is not an exact science. We have seen this before on numerous occasions. We've seen Rangers bet on red when it's black that's come up, sort of type thing. And I think when players are of an age, especially when they're only sort of trying to carve out their career, it's about three things. One, getting an opportunity. Two, them taking the opportunity. And three, understanding that because they've suddenly played one first team match or sat on the bench for a first team match, they are not suddenly Ballon d'Or candidates. And I think I feel sorry for youngsters coming through because they think they've got to take these chances when they come and really grasp them, and sometimes they go a bit overboard trying to make the grade. I don't think it does them any harm to be loaned out to go and learn their trade elsewhere, but I do think that some players might end up getting contracts and deals, and others will be shown the door and ultimately will maybe come back and haunt Rangers further down the road simply because they make a better fist of it elsewhere. So I again, to reiterate, it's not an exact science, and you just hope that the players that get the opportunity actually take it and make the best of it.
I completely agree. I think a problem with our club over the last maybe decade or so is that we've had more players shown the door than have been able to go on and really grab that opportunity. Obviously, he's probably listening, but just, in the assumption that Kieran Dixon is listening tonight, what advice would you give him to say, right, you've got this contract, ties you down for a few more years. What would you say to him to really make sure he does grab that opportunity?
I would tell him to listen, especially listen to what his coaches are saying to him, and especially if their senior players speak to him, because they have been through this before themselves. I mean, I could list 3 or 4 players who were over a period of the last 25 years who were very talented individuals, but completely lost their way between gaining a full-time contract as a youth player, even being introduced into the first team squad at times, and where they ended up. I wouldn't embarrass anybody by mentioning names. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 of the listeners and viewers will draw their own conclusions in those ones. But we've seen these people suddenly emerge as being the next big thing, and nothing comes of it. I think there's, you've put a hell of a lot of hard work in to get to where you are. I think over the next 2 seasons or 2 years, this is when you really have to knuckle down and put the work in. I mean, a lot of it is down to chance, luck, fate, call it what you will, but the opportunity is there for you, and it's up to you to take it.
Yeah, and let's say that if, as it probably looks like it might be, the title gets wrapped up sooner rather than later, would you say that there's a good opportunity for youngsters such as Kieran Dixon to really start making a mark in the first team in games where there's maybe a wee bit less pressure?
Well, yeah, perhaps, but I think, about 4, 5, 6 years ago, there were, certain things said about Rangers coming back through the leagues by playing youths, and this would be a great opportunity for Rangers to unearth some fantastic talent as they came from the lowest tier of Scottish football back into the top flight, and I don't really think that worked. I think you could probably name a handful of players who shone, maybe burned very, very brightly, and then just disappeared again. So, as I said earlier, not an exact science, but again, if the opportunity is there for Rangers to blood some of these youngsters, I mean, it'd be fantastic to do it. At the tail end of the season. And who knows, it might be a chance to actually, play out some matches in front of spectators and actually play out a couple of games in a team that has just been crowned champions of Scotland. Yeah,
no, precisely. This is obviously set against the context of us being 2/3 of the way through the January transfer window, which so far has been quiet. But this week we started to see a couple of links to some players that might be coming up the road. Notably, a couple of lads down at Bournemouth, including Jack Simpson, contracts expiring in the summer. And with us looking to pick up these free transfers in the summer, expired contracts down in England, signing up the youth team, do you think that sort of represents a marked transfer strategy away from spending a few £1 million on Ryan Kent and Yanis Hadji and Kemar Ruth? If we can get 55 wrapped up, we can then dial back on the spending, try and lean on the youngsters and lean on free transfers a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed this before on the show that, the Rangers scouting network, the talent spotting within Ibrox has had a pretty good year and a half in terms of the players that have emerged, in terms of the players that have been recruited and what they've actually done for the team and done for the club. I think this will be a continuation of that. I think the fact that there will always be an occurrence where you have to spend money on a player if you really want them, and that might run into a couple of £1 million at times. However, I think there are so many teams in England, and so many teams in England with good academy setups, that the players that are coming out of these academies who are being jettisoned by certain teams, again, a manager or a coach somewhere has decided you're a player that we want, you're not a player that we want. And on occasions, there is virtually nothing between. I mean, it could come down to whether a coach likes a guy's boots or his haircut, or whether he thinks he's paying attention when it comes time to putting things up my blackboard. Who knows? It's very, very fickle. But I'll say it again: the guys that are coming out of a lot of these academies are extremely good players. You only need to look at watch Sky or watch BT Sport or whoever it might be, and see the guys who suddenly emerge, having been on Manchester City since he was 3 years old, and suddenly released when he's 15, goes somewhere else, and suddenly they find there's a player there. And I think Rangers have been linked to players that are, for want of a better description, you might say obscure. They're not the big ticket items that you might say, well, of course they would be linked with that kind of player. It's guys that they've obviously targeted, they've looked at, they quite fancy them. And again, with the management team at Ibrox, they'll be feeding off the information that they can glean from other people, because you'll know it, I know it. Scouts, coaching staff, managers all talk, and the chat is, if two of them meet up or two of them are on the phone, it's like, what kind of, have you seen anybody here? Have you seen anybody there? And through word of mouth and recommendations, players suddenly end up, if you look at the current Rangers side, who would have thought that Tavernier, who would have thought that Goldson, who would have thought, a great many of these players in the current Rangers team would have been guys that would have been earmarked for greatness at Ibrox, but they've turned up at Rangers and they've done a job. So again, it's one of these situations where you might sign a player just now, but it might be a year down the line, or 2 years or 18 months down the line before it comes to fruition just how good these players are, or where they fit into the current Rangers setup. What I will say is that on this season and this season's form, it's going to take somebody with a bit of talent and somebody who's able to actually put some match-winning performances in to actually crack their way into the first team squad, even onto the bench, ahead of some of the guys who are actually there just now. Because there's some guys that are sitting on the bench, have done nothing wrong, but are just not getting the chance.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that sort of leads us quite nicely into looking at what we might do tomorrow against Ross County at home. Ross County themselves, Stuart, are probably having a wee bit of a resurgence under familiar character in Scottish football, John Hughes, been around the block a few times. So obviously they removed Stuart Kettlewell late on in 2020. John Hughes comes in and has got some impressive results. What kind of a game are you expecting tomorrow from Ross County?
Well, I think that Ross County have had that kind of edge of naivety knocked off them. I think that's maybe gone. I think John Hughes, knowing him as a character, he kind of shoots from the hip. He's kind of straight talking. I think there might be one or two home truths directed at one or two players, and I think he will have made Ross County, and it has made Ross County, if you look at the results that they've had, a more cohesive unit. They know what they should be doing. They know what they shouldn't be doing, and that will make them a more difficult outfit to break down and beat. Doesn't mean to say that Rangers won't beat them and take 3 points, but what it does say is that as a starting 11, each and every one of those guys will be will know what their role is, and how to play that particular role. And I think that is something that John Hughes will get out of his players, maybe that the previous coach or manager couldn't get. He will lay it down in straight terms. He will cut out maybe some of the frills and maybe some of the thrills if you'd watched Ross County defending over a period of time. But I think that's the biggest compliment you can say about John Hughes is that his teams will be organised, difficult to beat. It might not be pretty, but then again, you don't get points for it's not a beauty pageant. You don't get additional points for looking good.
No, and you don't associate the foot of the Scottish Premier League with beautiful football, do you? I mean, it's
no.
a scrapped time. But look, I mean, Ross County came to Ibrox back in November and admittedly gave us a tough game. You know, it was a Tavernier penalty, and if memory serves, a fairly late Brandon Barker goal that got the 3 points. So if Ross County have improved from that time, does that give you cause for concern, or do you think that there were lessons that Rangers could have learned from that day?
What gives me cause for concern is actually more about in and around the Rangers team. I think last weekend's performance against Motherwell, I mean, I wasn't really sold on it. Hindsight is always 2020, and I think that looking at the game again, the performance that Rangers put in actually wasn't too bad. It was actually pretty good at times. I think where my concern or disappointment might have been was the fact that Rangers were a goal down again before they started playing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I do wonder what it might take for Rangers to hear the first whistle or the sound of the first whistle in a match and actually go at it from the start. People will maybe shout me down in this one and say, well, that's not the way Rangers are. We play good football. We make a lot of passes. We're kind of slow and steady in the build-up, but eventually we'll win the matches. That's all well and good. When you do win the matches, you don't want to be chasing games from a goal behind. And I've heard this argument, and I've heard this argument, a long time ago when. Speak to Graham Souness, and somebody mentioned to Graham Souness about the silky soccer that the Liverpool side played in the late 70s and early 80s when he was there, stroking the passes around and all the passes they would make. And Souness said, no, for the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes of a match, we absolutely battered teams. The ball was just launched into the opposition penalty box. We smacked players. We stamped our authority in the game. We really pressed teams and forced them into make mistakes and forced them back. And once they were a goal to the good, then it's time to start playing your silky soccer, time to start making the passes, it's time to be creative. You don't get that opportunity, and you might never get that opportunity in some games, depending on how they go, if you start a goal down. I thought it was maybe unnecessary last week against Motherwell to show Motherwell so much respect early on, because Motherwell, I think, took that as a compliment and decided, well, Rangers are sitting back here and sort of standing off us a bit. Let's have a go at them, and lo and behold, get a goal. And again, it's something I would point to right through this entire season. That the amount of times and anybody tuning in this evening or listening over the next day or so, they will agree that there are times where Rangers are taking 60 minutes to really break a team down. After that point, it's like a couple of severe knockout blows and they might score 2 or 3 goals. Getting that first goal is sometimes takes a painfully long while, and it even takes longer, it seems, or it feels, if you're a goal behind in chasing that goal.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you look back at the pattern of our last few games. Aberdeen, that we started slowly, and Aberdeen started very strong and very physical, and that was a nervy first 15-20. Motherwell score on 20 minutes. Think back to the Old Firm as well. The first 20 minutes of that, I thought Celtic were, frankly, the more dominant side. So we've actually possibly done well over the last 4 weeks to come away only going a goal behind, in that one game, and it has cost us. Obviously, thankfully, Celtic go and drop points again in the week, and it negates that poor performance, which is fine. But you'd have to hope that the coaching staff and the management team have identified that and have surely put something to the team to tell them to sort it out.
I just noticed somebody in the comments here saying about Rangers, we need someone to shoot from outside the box.
Yeah.
That is something that is really lacking in the current Rangers team. It's almost like they play around. It's like ice hockey or a power play.
Yep.
You play around for somebody to get a slap shot, except it never comes. If you go back, maybe again, to reiterate, Rangers have been spoiled in the past, or Rangers fans have been spoiled, that over a good 25 years, you had guys like Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, you had guys like George Alberts, you had guys like even Ian Ferguson, who would suddenly just smash one from 25, 30 yards into the top corner, or at least hit it on target so they force the goalkeeper into a save. Whereas they seem devoid of that kind of talent just now, or there is an unwillingness. The talent might be there, but there's an unwillingness to actually have a shot in case you lose possession. It all seems to be about possession, and I get why that's important, but possession stats have never interested me. I always look at the score to see how a team's doing.
Yeah, no, you're right. There do seem to be times where players are afraid to have a shot. I mean, I think probably the worst culprit for that is Glenn Kamara, who will look anywhere other than having a pop-up goal, and it's a shame because he has scored decent goals in the past. He scored a lovely goal in Europe, I think against Benfica. The only player I think who seems willing to take a shot from outside the box, other than Morelos, who would probably have a shot from my house if he could, is Yanis Hadji. And when Yanis Hadji takes a shot, Kamara Roof goes in and knocks in the rebound, and you can see the value from that. So yeah. I completely agree. I think that's absolutely right.
We're looking for somebody to actually have a shot and get it on target. We are not looking for the next Lorenzo Amoruso who got one shot, a deflected one on target, and then for the next 4 seasons, just decided that he was going to turn into the Ruud Krol of Scottish football and try and smash them in from Augenthaler-esque and hit them from about 40 yards.
But we don't seem to have anyone that even has the confidence to try that. I mean, what I always think is you see Connor Goldson at least once every game striding forward with the ball because he's got acres of space until he gets to about 25 yards. And he just stops and sort of has a look around, squares it to Davis or squares it to Kamara, and then trots back off to the halfway line. It's a frustration.
As I call it, the invisible minefield. You get to a certain point, then you've got to turn left or right. You can't plough on through.
No. The difference tomorrow, could it be Ryan Jack? There's a lot of talk about him coming back into the side.
Do Rangers need him?
That's the question, I suppose, isn't it?
I'm not saying that in a way that find your fit again. There's the bench. Just sit on it for a couple of weeks. What I'm saying is, he needs some game time. He needs time back in his legs again. Whether that comes against Ross County, I'm not quite sure. Whether they save him and have him a bit fitter and a bit sharper by what he does off the pitch and what he does in training. That might be the way around it. I think, however, and this is just me personally, I think it's probably best to give him some game time, and it's probably best to give him some real action and see if he's up to it, because what you don't want to do is to ease him in and then find when push comes to shove that he suddenly breaks down again. Yeah. I think you're wanting to find out, over the next couple of months in particular, you're going to need guys like that, and you want to find out whether he's up to it or not, especially where we're at on the 22nd of January. Only, a matter of days to go in the transfer window. You want to know whether you have to go and make signings to cover for him or whether he's good to go.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think one of the other questions for tomorrow is Cedric Itten. The boy comes off the bench against Motherwell, gets another goal. Surely it's time for this boy to have a go from the start, with Kamara Roof still injured.
I said it a couple of weeks back. He offers you something different. He offers you, and especially last week against Motherwell, he gave Rangers a bit of physicality. Whereas it's quite easy for defenders if they know the balls are coming into going into feet. All of a sudden, you have Eaton going for balls at just about every height, whether they're at ankle height or whether they're, 2 feet above the defenders, and he's going for everything with his head. And immediately you're putting doubt in the minds of the defenders. You're putting doubt in the opposition goalkeeper's mind as well. Do I come for this, or am I going to get a smack? And I think last week you saw when he came in, I wouldn't say it's because he's a world beater, just down to sheer enthusiasm of being let off the leash maybe 10 minutes earlier than normal. He looked somebody who could do damage and really do the Rangers cause the power of good. Ultimately, that's how it proved. I think sooner maybe rather than later, he has to start just to see, even in a game, whether he can work as a combination with somebody else, because it's always going to be more difficult to watch two strikers than it is to watch the one.
Yeah, and Rangers have done well this season playing Ruth and Morelos alongside each other. One of those has dropped away with injury. I completely agree. Tomorrow seems to be the perfect opportunity, at home against one of the weakest teams in the league. It seems to me to be a no-brainer, but we'll have to see what happens.
I think this week of all weeks, I think you're right. This has almost been like a Brucey bonus. When it's been a great week for you and the club, and you have done absolutely sod all about it, other than heat up the popcorn and sit and watch how others are toiling and others are struggling. I think it's been a pretty good week for you up until now. You don't want to make don't want to balls up all of a sudden at home against Ross County, but I think the fact that the pressure appears to be telling elsewhere, and the fact that you're being made to look good, having sat in the house or just gone training every morning, I think that's maybe an opportunity, as you say, to actually experiment ever so slightly and see what might work for you in games going forward, because you don't want to be playing over the next. I mean, European ties, and the likes. Games in the league are going to fall into two categories: those that you have to win and those that you probably will win. And I think it'd be good to actually get some of the players who've been on the bench or might have been, there or thereabouts when it comes to the starting 11, actually getting a start. And certainly Eaton has to be one of those guys. Again, he scores goals.
Yeah, he does. He scores good goals, and different types of goals, and he links up play well. I think he brings a different dimension, and I'm with you. I think tomorrow's the perfect opportunity. Now, as you mentioned, it obviously has been quite a positive week for us as Rangers fans, without us having to do very much about it. And I couldn't help but notice that if you look at the betting odds, the odds on Rangers now to win the league are 1 to 100. So you'd have to bet £100 in order to win £1. It's certainly looking very, very favourable in the eyes of bookies and the eyes of the neutrals.
Do you mean favourable?
Favourable, exactly. But Stuart, what's your position? Are you now sort of starting to believe and starting to get excited and accept that this is probably the year for 55, or are you a fully paid up member of the one game at a time brigade?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, it's one game. In fact, it's one half at a time. It's I would say that Rangers have done really well up until this point in time. The fact that their nearest and dearest rivals are almost self-destructing before their very eyes, and therefore giving Rangers an advantage. And again, an advantage they are actually increasing. People were saying a couple of weeks back, Celtic have got 2 games in hand, Celtic have got 3 games in hand, Celtic have got 4 games in hand. There are very few teams through history in football globally in any generation who've managed to say we've got 4 games in hand and go out and win them all. Even some of the best teams that have ever played football in anywhere in Scotland, in England, on the continent. Winning 4 games that you have in hand is nigh on an impossibility. So when people were trying to judge and gauge the league table and where Celtic might be and how they might play catch up and all the rest of it, the first thing you've got to take into account, as I say, better teams than the current Celtic team have never won the 4 games that are outstanding. But we're also talking about a Celtic team here who have been pretty dire at times. So there was no guarantee that they were ever going to win those matches anyway. And lo and behold, if you look what happens, all of a sudden Rangers find themselves, it's been. I mean, I heard it on the radio. Rangers' lead has been cut to 20 points. It's like slashed to 20 points. You use whatever terminology you so wish. And Celtic have still got 2 games in hand, and still the big question mark, the big doubt is whether they'll take any points from those games. So Rangers have been pressing home their advantage by doing nothing. And that is a fantastic situation, a fantastic position to be in.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It is an incredible position. I mean, I'm just looking at the league table here now. 66 points. I believe Celtic aren't actually playing tomorrow because of the League Cup semi-finals. So we win tomorrow. Admittedly, they'll have 3 games in hand, but that puts us 23 points clear.
But you fall back into you fall into the same cycle again. You fall into the same cycle of suddenly going from 2 games in hand to 3 games in hand with no guarantee that having 3 games in hand is going to compute to being 9 points guaranteed. Exactly. It's for Rangers and for Steven Gerrard, especially Steven Gerrard, the focus and concentration that he must be trying to extol in these players just now is he's doing a really good job at it. That you've still got to do your job. You can't look at the league table because nothing is won. And for him to keep the focus and the concentration of the Rangers group on the matches that they're playing rather than what's happening elsewhere, I reckon that's maybe probably one of the most difficult challenges he's faced as a manager. People will say, "Oh, how can you say that with a 20 points in front?" But it's just as easy for a team to suddenly only take 2 points out of 15. You only need from Dubai. The wheels came absolutely off, and I think I could say with a bit of confidence last week against Motherwell, if that had been 12 months previously, Rangers would have lost that game 2-1.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. That's the question, isn't it? It's what does Gerrard do? Because I think against Motherwell last week there was a little bit of laziness, which could be maybe bred from an overconfidence or maybe people starting to believe the hype and believe this is wrapped up. So the question is, what does Gerrard have to do to keep these players' feet on the ground and say this isn't over until you win another 10 games?
Well, I think a big advantage tomorrow is that Rangers are playing at Ibrox. Mm-hmm. I think there's some of the players last week, they just don't fancy playing at Fir Park. People will say, well, why is that? I think you only need to go to trackside or track level at the side of the pitch at Fir Park to realise that there's an almighty slope runs across the pitch. And even if you're running, if you're running from the right in and goal, kicking towards the sort of college end, if you were doing that, you're suddenly running uphill. It's a far, it's not as if you're going from one end to the other. It's uphill or downhill. There's actually the slope runs across the pitch, and I do think the mindset with some players is they just don't fancy Fir Park, especially on a wet, Sunday afternoon. They would much prefer to be playing at Ibrox, and I think tomorrow, I do honestly think you will see a far better performance from Rangers all in, simply because they're more comfortable and more relaxed in those surroundings.
Well, there you go. That sounds like a very promising place to leave the show this evening. That's us ticked over the half-hour mark, so I think that's probably enough for it as a wee preview. As I say, the show will be back on Sunday night with David Wren in the hot seat, reflecting on the Ross County game and looking ahead to another busy week. I'd like to thank Stuart for giving up his valuable Friday evening for joining me and giving some excellent insight as always. And thanks to everyone for getting involved in the YouTube and leaving us comments as well. Thank you for getting involved in the show. That's kind of all we've got for tonight. As I say, please do head over and support our sponsors at www.rangerspicks.com. Head over to our website at www.gersnet.com as well and support the website over there. Other than that, thank you very, very much for tuning in. Enjoy the game tomorrow and we will see you on Sunday.